Ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, welcome to another episode of Wild and Live. I hope you're all doing well. What is Wild and Live? Well, for those of you that are new to the show and new to the channel, this show is all about giving you the coolest facts from the animal kingdom, and we're doing that with the help of some awesome guests, conservationists, filmmakers, and biologists from across the planet. Don't forget, if you are new to this channel, please press the subscribe button, become part of this growing community. I would appreciate it a lot. Today's guest describes himself as a conservationist working on native species reintroductions with the Derek Gower Consultancy. He mainly specializes in mammals, but recently started to branch out and into working with invertebrates too, specifically glowworms, as well as being a keen naturalist since childhood. He is an amateur nature writer, or budding nature writer, I should say, with a blog which can be found at PeteCooperWildlife.com. I will leave the description down below. Pete Cooper, are you wild and live?
I'm certainly live and feeling a bit wild.
This is why I love this guy. So I know Pete for, how long have we known each other for?
Well, I first met when I was 12 years old, I seem to remember.
Jeez, you're giving away my age. Don't tell everybody how
Yeah.
old you are. Yeah, that was quite a number of years ago. So, man, it's brilliant to see you kind of blossom and come into your own, and such a dedicated naturalist. And thank you so much for joining us today. I've got a couple of questions for you about glowworms. I'm glad you're here to tell us why you're so fascinated by them. But I've got a little bone to pick with you, because I did a little research of my own, and it turns out that glowworms aren't worms at all. So tell us, what is that all about?
Yeah, so they're not worms at all. You're absolutely right. It's a bit of a catch-all term that includes lots of different insects. And in the UK, when we're talking about a glowworm, we're specifically talking about a beetle, actually. And that beetle, scientific name is Lampyris noctiluca. And it is something that's been told about in our stories for generations, not just in the UK, but in Europe. The Romans used to tell many tales about glowworms, across Asia as well. You know, they're an animal that literally glows in the dark. They make light. And to species like us, which literally craves anything that can make the sort of natural beauty in such a way, it's no surprise that these are animals that have really fascinated us right through to the dawn of civilization. So the glowworm in the UK, it only really glows for a very small part of its life, which is around about June to July. So we're actually going into it now. But it spends the first 2 years of its life actually as a larva, which does glow, but only a little bit if you disturb them, give them a little poke, which we obviously don't want to do too often. But mostly skulks around in the undergrowth, looking for prey to build up its size until it can pupate and then become an adult, glow, breed, and die. So it's a short life then, but it's a very beautiful life when it reaches that point.
So let's go back and just get a sense of the life cycle of a glowworm. So it starts out as an egg, is that correct?
Yes.
Can you tell us how those eggs are laid, where they're laid, and how long it then takes to transform or hatch from that egg stage into the next?
Yeah, so the eggs are absolutely tiny, so barely a millimeter across, and these are laid generally within damp places like moss, under rotten logs, really nice, cold, dark places where you're not going to find them very easily. It's probably the egg stage of its life where it's going to be most vulnerable. There's lots of small creatures out there which will love to eat an egg. It's going to be vulnerable to funguses and damp, so it will catch mold. And in captivity, you can expect about 9 in 10 eggs to hatch, but in the wild, you might be looking at half or less than that. But those larvae that are likely to hatch out will do so in a month of being laid, and that's generally around the autumn time. And when they emerge, they are only about sort of 2 to 3 millimeters long. But from the get-go, they can already hunt. They can catch snails, which is actually the main prey of glowworms. And they will keep doing that through about 2 years. They will go through something called diapause in the winter, and diapause is a bit like hibernation. They basically curl up and shut themselves down until it's warm enough to feed. So that's all going on in the undergrowth, hidden away. But there is a point when they reach about nearly 2 years of age, generally when they're about to pupate into adults, where you are likely to see glowworm larvae, and that's when they go on walkabout. And if you're in suitable glowworm habitat and you walk along a path, you might see this little glowworm just going along, pushing for its life, very fast in glowworm terms. It's not very fast in our terms, you can pick up very easily, but glowworms is going for it. And no one knows exactly why they're doing it, but what's likely is that the glowworm larvae are traveling as far and wide as they can to find new glowworms they can breed with and move through that landscape. Once that stage is done, then they'll pupate, which is a bit like going to a cocoon for a butterfly. It's a similar sort of life stage. And they'll pupate for about 10 days on average. It depends on temperature. Sometimes it's shorter, sometimes it's longer. And that's when they then emerge into their adult form. The females are bigger. So the female, when it's a larvae, will be about 8 to 10 millimeters long. And basically, she can then be of a similar size when she's an adult. Males are a bit smaller, but the males also have wings. And those wings allow the males to travel around and look for the females. The females, as adults, they don't travel at all. They basically move maybe a centimeter, 2 centimeters in their adult lifetimes. But what they're doing is the stunning display that we know glowworms for. They'll look for a nice high shoot of grass or a stick or something like that, and they'll just sit there and glow and glow and glow. And they'll keep glowing either until a male finds them and they mate and she lays her eggs and then dies, or until no males find her and she'll die herself, very sadly. But generally, there'll be some males about looking for her, and she'll lay the eggs, and the cycle begins all over again.
Nice. We'll get onto that a little bit, because you're talking about the stages of the glowworm's life. So you've got the egg, the larvae. It eventually turns into a pupa, pupates, and then becomes an adult. And you said the size of a glowworm at the larval at the larval stage is what, 8 to 10 millimeters or centimeters?
It's 10 millimeters.
And so why have I? Maybe this is me getting confused.
I'm sorry.
I've seen glowworms that are much bigger, and
Yes,
so
sorry.
are there different species of glowworm?
There are different species around. I must admit, sorry, that's the morning brain. An adult female can be a bit bigger than that. She can be about sort of 20, nearly 30 millimeters, but still millimeters.
Yeah.
But there are lots of different glowworms around the world, again, which the name is applied to, but not necessarily related. So, of course, you've got quite a few beetles, which are called glowworms. But if you go to New Zealand and you go to the glowworm caves there, which I've been to in Waitomo, they are actually the larvae of gnats. And that's a completely different animal. That is called Arachnocampa luminosa, which sounds a bit like a Harry Potter spell in my mind. But Arachnocampa luminosa, basically, in its larval form only, hangs these amazing long strings of silk from the cave ceilings, which then also glow using the same chemical compounds used by the glowworm we have in the UK.
Right, so that makes sense, because I have to apologise to everybody that's watching because I assumed that we were going to be talking about those glowworms, which then turn into the fungus gnat. So it's really interesting to find out that you have this one term, or this common name, glowworms, which refer to a number of different species.
Yeah, that's exactly right. And it's an interesting story with both of our glowworms and the glowworms in New Zealand. And it's something we find incredibly beautiful that almost disguises something that's actually quite a horror story. So when you go to the glowworm caves, you can go in a boat and you sit on these little rivers under the caves, and it's the most relaxing things in the world. I remember sitting back and just literally, it's like a starry sky, the universe looking back down at you. But instead, it's all these amazing little dots made by the glowworms in New Zealand. But what those luminescent strings do is actually ensnare prey, and then once it's caught something, it's been lured to the light. The glowworm then pulls the silk thread back up, consuming it as it goes, and consumes its prey alive. Not very nice. Cool.
Disgusting.
But, yeah, it looks very beautiful to us, but very beautiful to the prey as well. But I think the Maori name, I can't remember what the Maori name was off the top of my head right now, but it effectively meant reflections in the water. So, as soon as people arrived in New Zealand about 500 years ago, they saw these animals, and their instant thought was beauty.
Yeah, I mean, I've seen some videos and pictures and imagery of these glowworms that turn into the fungus gnats. I've never seen glowworms in real life or in person, if I did want to see them, you've kind of given us a little indication already with the fungus gnat in New Zealand. Where would I find either of those species? So either the ones that you find in New Zealand or those that you find in the UK.
So New Zealand ones, the fungus gnats, they will be found in caves. So they are very much specific to the caves. They will lay their eggs on cave walls, and they're quite specific to the habitat, which does mean they're either very hard to find, it's inaccessible, or in the case of the Waitomo caves, they're very easy to find because it's a big tourist attraction. And when we're allowed to, if you go to New Zealand and you go into a local tourist office, you'll find lots of brochures and go into glowworm caves, and it is a stunning spectacle. Now, in terms of the glowworm we have here in the UK, the beetle, Lampyris noctiluca, they're quite well distributed. They live over quite a large part of England and Wales, not so much Scotland where it's a bit cooler, but their abundance probably has gone down in time. So where you find glowworms now is generally habitats where you've got a perfect mix, and where our hand isn't overly what's the word? I'm going to say it, destructive. Where our hand isn't overly too destructive, because throughout its life stage, the glowworm basically needs different habitats. In its larval form, it needs grassland and scrub. So scrub basically being an interface between grassland and woodland, where it's messy and no one's really controlling it, and you've got a small shrub here and lots of grass there and big bushes there and some trees there. It's that chaos of nature that the glowworm loves, because that scrub and that unmown grass, and the unmown bit being really important, harbours lots of snail prey. And if you haven't got snails, you haven't got glowworms. And of course there's cover as well, so it's protected from the elements too. Protection from predators as well. But actually, glowworm larvae probably don't have as much to worry about from predators. There's not a huge amount of work being done on it, but there is scientific papers that show that other related species are avoided by wood mice, presumably because they taste quite nasty. And John Tyler, who is probably the UK's glowworm expert, has done experiments with robins where he's painted food items like a glowworm after a glowworm has been fed to a robin, and the robin always avoided them after that. So it's probable that the glowworm tastes pretty horrible. And actually, I mentioned it earlier briefly, but if you tap a glowworm larvae, it will give a little pulse of light out. Again, no one's quite sure why they do that, but John Tyler, again, theorizes that pulse of light, a bit like the poison dart frogs in the Amazon that are very brightly colored to tell you you're not going to be happy if you eat me. It's a similar warning, I'm lighting up, which means that if you eat me, you're probably going to regret it. So they probably don't have much risk from predators, but the cover is certainly good for keeping them safe from the elements. But once they
go ahead.
That's right. But once they reach the adult stage, that's when they need shorter grassland, because then the female wants to go somewhere where she's obvious, where the male can see her as he flies overhead. And if she's in too much cover, then obviously she can't breed. So you do still need that shorter grass around the edges for the females to display. So having that mix of both scrub, unmown grassland, and some shorter grassland can be quite a complex thing to have, but it still exists in places.
Fantastic. And just so we're clear, we have spoken about the fungus gnat, which is a glowworm that turns into the fungus gnat and feeds on fungi. What's the name of the beetle in the UK? Do we still call those beetles glowworms?
Yeah, the common name is still officially the common glowworm, or the European glowworm. Yeah.
European glowworm. Not the glowworm beetle, just the European or common glowworm.
Yeah, that's right. So if you want to be specific, it's Lampyris noctiluca, but
Lampyris noctiluca.
It's gonna be a twister if you say it all day.
Okay, well we're talking about Lampyris. Lampyris noctiluca. Have I got it right, Pete?
Leviosa, not Leviosa. Yes, Lampyris noctiluca.
Why does Lampyris noctiluca glow? We've spoken about the fact that they can glow at the larval stage, but they tend to glow when they've transformed into the final adult beetle stage. Why are they glowing? I think you did allude to it. So can we just make sure we're specific about that? I want to.
Yeah, of course. So let's go through firstly how it glows, the basics, and then why it glows in the first place. So in terms of how it glows, it's a chemical reaction which is actually relatively simple. Now, I'm not really a chemist. I did terrible at chemistry when I was at sixth form college. In fact, if science wasn't related to animals, I had no part in it, basically. But I've had to learn a bit of it for the glowworm specifically. And when you look at a glowworm's light production, it's between two chemicals called luciferin and luciferase. Now, luciferin is quite a small molecule, about 20, 30 atoms. Also, we're talking atoms, we're talking tiny. On a relative scale, luciferase is much, much bigger, several thousand atoms. They're obviously still tiny in the relative scheme of things. But basically, what happens is the luciferase mixes luciferin, chemical reaction with oxygen and ATP, if you want to be specific, and boom, that energy creates light. Now, what's really interesting is that luciferase, as long as you give it the chance to mix with ATP, this chemical, it will light up. And scientists have actually used luciferase to study active genes in all plants and all animals. If you apply luciferase to a gene, if it's got ATP in it, boom, it lights up. So you can tell which genes are actually working and active. And there's even been talk that this could be used to search for life on other planets. Because if you're applying that luciferase, and it's found active ATP, that means, boom, you've got active genes, you've got active living organisms. So some really fascinating stuff. And this reaction can be seen in basically all the bioluminescent animals you'll get in the world, all the glowworms, but also things like bioluminescent plankton, which obviously you can see amazing pictures of in the tropics, where the sea literally glows green and blue. But actually, you do get that in the UK as well in places. I've been swimming in Cornwall, where I went to university. And if you go there at night and height of the summer on a very clear night, you can actually see a little green glow surround your arm and little tiny stars in the water around you. So bioluminescent plankton can be found in the UK too. So that's the actual reaction, a simple chemical mixture which makes something magic, which I think is the beauty of nature, which you and I, everyone else who's engaged with the natural world, just finds just so amazing, why we do what we do. But then why does a glowworm do what it does when it comes to this reaction? Well, it's literally to attract a mate. So the female, when she glows, it's at full pelt, and she has two little spots at the back and then two segments of her abdomen which really just fully light up. And you can see that glow from about 50 yards away if you're walking along a path at night and you saw that glowworm female glowing.
So you can see this light from quite a distance.
Oh, for sure, yeah. And there's even stories about how people, a century or two ago, when glowworms were more numerous, would actually collect glowworms and put them in jars, and you could even read by the light of them. For any literary buffs of reading, Thomas Hardy, the famous 19th century novelist, there's a scene in one of his books where the characters are trying to play cards by night, but have run out of nowhere to see the cards. So they collect glowworms and they head around them, put them in a jar, and use the light of the glowworms to actually see the game. So there's always lovely little stories like that. But that light for the female is the most important thing. It's life and death, because if she doesn't attract a male in, then she's got no way of fertilizing her eggs and going through. But luckily, those males swoop down very quickly.
So it all comes down to trying to get some.
Pretty much, yeah. Exactly it. Yeah. And the males are very keen indeed. If they see a light, they don't care where it's coming from. They think, that's the ticket. You could walk around with an LED torch, an LED light, and the males will still come for it, basically.
And can I ask you, if the males are attracted to the females, which are emitting this light using luciferase, which is an enzyme that breaks down luciferin, and you get this wonderful, it creates light. Is there what am I trying to say? Is there like a specific pattern or to the way that the female emits the light that then draws the male in, or does that not matter?
It's literally constant. So you'll get other fireflies and glowworms in the tropics which have a flashing light. Mm-hmm. I mean, I've been through forests in northern Vietnam, and if you go there at night, it's like you've walked into fairyland, because you've got all these fireflies with flashing lights going everywhere, just like a constant rave. It's amazing. Whereas you go to a country lane in the UK, and that light will be constant. Sometimes it looks like it disappears, but that's more like the female just sort of readjusting her angle a bit. But it's a constant light, and you'll keep doing that every night. Generally at the darkest time, which in summer you're looking at between sort of 10 p.m. and midnight. until she mates, basically.
So for that whole period of time, so they will glow consistently or constantly for up to 2 hours.
Yeah.
Wow, that's amazing.
Yeah, until it needs to be. Yeah.
Wow, that's incredible. I love that. As well as their ability to glow, Pete, see, I've got some questions here which clearly you've answered them already, because I was wondering. Oh, I wanted to ask you about the sticky secretions that they secrete, but that's obviously the fungus gnat. Let's talk about our UK species. You mentioned that they like to eat snails. How do they go about doing this? Because if a snail to me is going to be much bigger than the size of a glowworm larva. So how do they eat snails?
Well, this is where things in the glowworm's lifestyle really change tack. This is where it turns from the nutcracker to aliens.
I love it.
Because the glowworm has this toxin which it injects through its fangs, and it'll literally just walk along, find a snail. It'll inspect it a bit, see whether it's game to go for, and with a few bites like that, very quick little nips, it will inject that snail or slug with this toxin. It sometimes takes a little bit of time to take effect. So what the glowworm will often do is actually climb onto the snail's shell and just sort of wait and see what happens. But while it's waiting there, this toxin does two things. First of all, it paralyzes the snail, so it can't move up to a point. So generally, it'll initially struggle. It might sort of weave its way shortly after the bites while it's taking effect. But then you'll find a point when the snail stops, where the paralysis has happened. And at the same time, its insides are being turned into gloop. All its organs, tissues being dissolved while the snail is still alive. And while the snail is still alive, the glowworm will then go in and then literally suck up all the insides of the snail like a straw while it's still alive. There have been cases of some snails somehow being able to overcome it, and even after the glowworm's fed, somehow had enough tissues intact to slide off the other way.
Incredible.
But of course, most of the time, these poor little guys die. As you can imagine, there can be quite a big difference in size between snail and glowworm. If you're looking at a newly hatched larva that's 3 millimeters long, a garden snail, which is about sort of that big, isn't really going to be a viable target. But there are much smaller species that can work. Whereas if you're a much larger glowworm, say a female larva about 20 millimeters long, then obviously a tiny little snail can retreat back to its shell and you can't actually get around there. But even with there is big size difference, you're looking at an animal that is about 30. It can be about 30 times the weight of the glowworm that it's been bringing down. So it's a bit like a leopard biting an elephant and then just sort of letting the elephant then dissolve into goo. That's the kind of sort of scale you're looking at. It's incredible thing you see in the natural world. And I have seen this process happening in captivity. And when you have larvae together in captivity, they will actually group feed, almost like a pack of hyenas gathering around the snail as it goes down.
Sounds super gruesome.
It's very gruesome. But the glowworms are very tidy because obviously, the snail makes a lot of mess in this. First of all, is all this slime and gloop that's eating. And when the snail is first attacked, it will often froth up and use that froth as a sort of defensive line against the glowworm. And this means the glowworm itself is going to get very, very mucky. But what the glowworms have is a little tail organ with tiny little white filaments. And after these glowworms are finished and feed on the snail, I could see them taking out the tail filament and actually wiping down each segment of their body, making themselves nice and clean all over again. So they're very tidy little creatures.
So it's like gorging and feeding and then using a bib to wipe your mouth.
Exactly.
Make sure you're all
a
good.
bib that comes out of their bum. That is how the glowworm do.
I think that's got to be one of the quotes of this the whole Wild and Live season. God, on the note of them, how they feed in captivity, you are going to be doing something similar. Not wiping your mouth with a bib that comes out of your bum, but you're working in conjunction with the Derek Gow consultancy. You are hoping to, or you're planning a project which involves breeding glowworms. Why are you breeding glowworms? How are you going to be doing it? And what's the point anyway? Because surely these glowworms aren't necessarily the I wouldn't imagine glowworms to be the most endangered or animal on the planet, or animals that are under threat in it or in any way.
Mm. Yes, there are multiple aspects to it. So yeah, while glowworms aren't exactly on the absolute brink in the UK, for quite a few decades now, there has been lots of quite local, small-scale studies that suggested there have been local declines in glowworms. And anecdotally, if you talk to people about glowworms, they'll often say, "Oh, he used to be so much more when I was a kid," or "I used to see him so much more often. Don't see him now." And often, what you find in science is that you get the anecdote and the story first. That creates a hypothesis. That then creates the investigation, and then from that investigation, you then decide what you're going to do next. And actually, only this year, the first big peer-reviewed study of glowworm decline in the UK was published, and that has found that even with a standard method where citizen scientists were going back to the same sites, to the same methodology, same time to monitor glowworm numbers, there is a substantiated decline of glowworms within England.
So glowworms have gone down over the years.
Yes, they have. Yeah.
And so you're trying to bolster those populations. How
Yeah.
are you doing that? Because you've got to, I suppose, collect them at the right stage, and
That's exactly it.
and then you've also got to feed them.
So these are all tricky bits, and if you go into a captive breeding reintroduction project, it's always going to be a challenge. You've got to sort of face up to that. The question then becomes, at what point does the challenge outweigh the benefits of the costs? Now, there hasn't been much done on glowworms. There has been a few individuals that have reared them in the past, so we do know how they work in captivity. We do know they can be bred and they can be maintained. But there is a matter of keeping that supply up. So snails, for example, can be a big challenge. So we're looking at collecting wild snails that they would feed on, but then breeding those so we have our own captive stock of snails to feed on. And there have been keepers that have also pets. So these are.
I think we're losing you a little bit.
When it comes to collect.
Can you still let's just wait for the internet to catch up with us, shall we? Sorry about that, guys. I think our Wi-Fi's are playing up. Let's see. I think you are Wild and Live once again. So yeah, you're saying that you are going to be breeding glowworms as well as snails, so they have something to eat.
Yes, that's right. So keep those snails going through. The winter's a particularly tricky bit. So people who have reared glowworms before in the past have found that some of the largest diets of larvae they've had have been in the winter stage, when they naturally go into that diapause, that hibernation stage. So we want to recreate that to ensure a natural life cycle. But if you keep them at room temperature, then they won't hibernate. If you keep them outside, then they're far more vulnerable to elements and things like frost. So we're looking at things like keeping them in cool outhouses, maintaining humidity, and we are covering our bases in every aspect of that as well by talking to other experts in the field of invertebrate conservation and breeding who have had experience of the species before.
I was going to ask you, Pete, so once you've bred these glowworms, I can see we're almost out of time. How many do you expect to breed in total, and over what period of time? And then once you've got the right amount, how are you going to distribute them?
So if we can get at least 10 females, and from each female we can rear maybe at least half a clutch, maybe create several hundred glowworms to start with, that'd be a good start. An important thing with a relatively new project like this is ensuring that we know what to do and how we're going to do it before we sort of increase that large scale. So my boss, Derek Gow, has been breeding water voles for the last 25 years. He's been very successful with that. We're the UK's largest water vole breeder. But when he started out, again, no one really had any idea how to breed these animals at a large scale. And many mistakes are made as they try to figure out the best methods of doing it. But if you make a mistake, you improve on it and you try and do it better, and that's exactly what they did. And that's always part of the learning curve when doing a project like this. So in terms of why we're going to do it then, so we know that glowworms are declining. We know that one of the big risks of glowworms is habitat fragmentation, where the habitat where these guys live becomes isolated within the wider landscape.
Right.
Now, some species cope better with this isolation than others, but the glowworm doesn't move very well. The males can fly, but then the females they breed with, when they're adults, they certainly don't move very far at all. The most chance they get to move is in a larval stage, and we still don't know exactly how far they go, and they are generally quite slow moving. So, we don't know if they're going to move particularly far. It's possibly why one of the best sites you find glowworms today is these old railway lines where there's still long connections through the landscape where the habitat isn't overmanaged. So because of that, it means that setting up new populations with increased genetic diversity is going to be important. And that's where the role for reintroduction can come into that. And there's also this other factor that by looking at the glowworm and looking to reintroduce that, obviously to support these colonies, you're going to need the habitat back again. And as you discussed earlier, these guys need a great mix of habitat you don't see very often. But this habitat, this mix of scrub, long grass and short grassland, also means you get a great diverse mix of wildlife. By not mowing so often, it means that certain plant species, certain insect species, which may get cut off before they have a chance to redevelop through early cuts in the summer, now have that chance to do so. So if you're a community and you're signing up to a project to have glowworms reintroduced within your churchyard, along your meadows, maybe around your schools, you're essentially entering a contract to ease your hand off nature a little bit and just let your nature around you go a little bit more wild. And suddenly the glowworm becomes this umbrella, this almost this tribute species to the wider ecosystem. And one of the ways we're basically showcasing this project is as lights in the dark, because in the UK, we have lost about 75% of our wildlife species are now in decline from the State of Nature report. We are 29th from the bottom of the most nature depleted countries in the world. We are in a real state. But with this one animal, this light in the dark, this sort of symbol of hope, if you can get communities on board to enter this contract to better the natural world around them for the species and by effect loads of others, you're creating this natural gateway into nature. And that is a big part of the project as well.
Nice. I love all of that, kind of describing glowworms, such a tiny creature, as like a keystone species, an ambassador species, one that can help us protect other plants, animals, insects. Fantastic and so fascinating talking to you, Pete. I think that's our time done. Thank you so much. One last question before I let you go. What is it about these inverts that captivates your imagination and makes you want to invest your time protecting them?
Well, it's a bit of a cliche to those who know me, because I always say it as to why I love the natural world. And I literally say the natural world is magic, because it's one thing we don't really have control over. It's been here for millions of years before us. Well, it's been here since the Earth really formed. And hopefully, if we don't mess it up too much, it'll be here for millions more after. But it's that great unknown and familiarity. It's literally magic. It's besides everything we create. And the glowworm exemplifies both the biological magic, if you like, the magic of how it creates a light from a simple reaction, how it feeds on snails in a way that even the most creative, imaginative horror writer can never possibly imagine. The way it will stand resolutely on this grass stem, knowing that it's going to die unless it lays its eggs and lets that generation pass on, completely selfless. And then it's magical from the human element too, the way it has brought together civilizations, even at times of war, when there were conquerors going out and bringing countries to heel, their mythologies still saw the species as light, as hope of beauty. And that had appealed to the better side of human nature, no matter what period of time we were going through. It's the magic of life, and it's the magic of stories. That's the glowworm.
Pete, thank you so much for joining us. I love that. I think that's a perfect ending for thinking of nature and life as pure magic. Thank you so much, Pete. I love that. Magic from the Lamparis nocturna. Is that correct?
Almost. You got the first bit.
No. What's the second one?
Lamparis noctiluca.
Noctiluca. Magic from Lamparis noctiluca with Pete Cooper. Good luck with your project, and I hope it all goes well. You're going to be starting that in June, in July, hopefully, or is it going to be pushed back a bit?
It will be collecting this month, hopefully.
Great, fantastic. Well, look, good luck, and let's keep in touch. Thank you so much for sharing your knowledge and passion about glowworms. It's been fantastic.
Been a pleasure, Patrick.
All right, take care now, Pete.
Very much.
All right, see ya. Ladies and gentlemen, that was Pete Cooper telling us all about glowworms. A really great chat that we had there. with Pete. I hope you enjoyed yourself. If you are new to this channel, please remember to subscribe and also press the little bell. It will give you notifications whenever we go live or a new video comes up. Keep an eye on the video list, and we've got some videos coming up for next week, hopefully. So yeah, just keep an eye on that, and hopefully we'll see you next week, Monday at 11 a.m. Until then, thank you for watching. Take care, and I will see you all next time. See ya.